In the seedy underworld of Prohibition-era Chicago, one man's name sent shivers down the spines of many: Jack McGURN, famously known as Machine Gun Jack. His deadly proficiency with the Thompson submachine gun made him a feared figure in the city's criminal circles. McGURN's reputed role in the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre solidified his reputation as a ruthless enforcer. But beyond the headlines and gunfire, McGURN's life was a web of ambition, loyalty, and treachery, painting a vivid portrait of Chicago's turbulent past. This is the captivating story of Jack McGURN, a man whose legacy continues to intrigue, offering a glimpse into the gritty reality of the Roaring Twenties. On November 7, 1906, 2 months after receiving news that she could reunite with her husband, Giuseppe Garibaldi embarked on her own journey to America. Accompanied by her 4-year-old son Vincenzo, his baby brother Salvatore, and her 8-year-old brother Francesco, she boarded the passenger ship the Gregory March, setting sail for a new chapter in their lives. The father of her 2 boys, Tommaso Garibaldi, eagerly awaits his family's arrival at 14 Union Street in Brooklyn. This apartment building sits right on the apron of the docks and is primarily occupied by immigrant men in similar circumstances, awaiting their family's arrival. Tommaso, who was born in the same year as Giuseppe and now 19, has been working tirelessly as a longshoreman. He was earning just 22 cents an hour for 2.5 years. All this to bring his family to America, which is a dream soon to be realized. Tommaso and Giuseppe grew up in Licata, a small village near Agrigento, Sicily's largest city on the southwestern coast. Tommaso came from a family of market haulers transporting fresh produce along the coast. Despite living in a picturesque location, poverty and violent crime tarnished their surroundings. This hardship drove Tommaso to seek a better life in America for Giuseppe and their children, where opportunities seemed limitless and laws offered protection. However, upon arriving in Brooklyn, Tommaso was disheartened to find that the Black Hand gangsters, notorious extortionists and murderers from Sicily, had established a presence there, adapting their criminal activities for urban environments. As with many other immigrants, the process of Americanization had commenced for the Garibaldi family. Vincenzo's name, which roughly translates to James, insists on being called Vincent. Salvatore adopts the name Sam, and Giuseppe now goes by Josephine. At an early age, Vincent's mother cautioned him to remain a good man and harm nobody who is innocent. Vincent quickly learnt that the rules of family life are vastly different from those of the street. He attended a Brooklyn public school and excelled in almost every sport, displaying a natural ability for anything physical. The children in Brooklyn schools were notably tough and often engaged in violence, inheriting a legacy of brutal behavior from the area's past, mirroring the adults around them. Even in the youngest grades, the public schools were harsh examples of survival of the fittest. The Garibaldi family expanded with the arrival of a 3rd son. They named Frank on January 15, 1910, and 9 months later, daughter Angelina was born. Early in the winter of 1911, Tommaso fell ill with a severe virus and passed away before the new year. By spring of 1912, Josephine had met a grocer named Angelo De Mori. By early autumn, Angelo had taken on the role of the man of the house, assuming the financial responsibilities, and on April 15, 1913, Josephine gave birth to their son Anthony. Meanwhile, Vincent encountered the tough streets of Brooklyn and the youthful violence of the schoolyard. Street gangs were prevalent, continuing the traditions of the infamous Dead Rabbits and their 5 Points counterparts. Because of this, Angelo encouraged Vincent to learn boxing, as he was small for his age and a natural target for bullies. Vincent began boxing in gymnasiums and YMCA rings during elementary and middle school. By the time he reached high school, he was serious about fighting as a welterweight wherever he could. In 1917, as America entered World War I, 15-year-old Vincent was in his sophomore year of high school. Also growing up in Brooklyn at the same time was future Chicago crime boss, Alphonse Capone. Vincent's interest in golf becomes another significant aspect of his life. He is introduced to the sport and starts working as a caddy at one of the few country clubs in or near Brooklyn. Initially, caddying is just a means for Vincent to earn some money, but soon he develops a genuine passion for golf. This passion ultimately leads him to a professional level and a pivotal moment that shapes his future. At the age of 16, Vincent decides to change his surname from Gibaldi to Gibardi, possibly as a way to honor his father. In certain circumstances, he also goes by his stepfather's name, Dimori. Following the Spanish influenza outbreak, New York experiences severe economic difficulties. Angelo believes that the grocery business would be less competitive in Chicago. Josephine agrees and they decide to move, specifically to the Sicilian enclave of Little Italy on the west side, known to locals as the Patch. Around the same time, the young New Yorker, Alphonse Capone, arrives in Chicago to work for Johnny Torrio. Torrio, a relatively mild-mannered criminal, is also a cousin to Chicago's colorful crime boss, Big Jim Colosimo. As the family celebrates their first Christmas in Chicago, a significant event occurs shortly after the new year that will shape Vincent's future. At the stroke of midnight on January 17, 1920, which ironically is also Alphonse Capone's 21st birthday, the noble experiment begins. The Volstead Act, which prohibits the sale and consumption of alcohol, has now become the law. The government, in a fervent attempt to impose moral standards, unwittingly ushers in nearly 13 years of prohibition, sparking the era of the bootlegger. Smugglers and home distillers will try to cater to the demand of the public, but out of this enormous change will not only appear the bootlegger, but a new generation of gangster. Meanwhile, Vincent acquaints himself with Chicago and finds nearby gyms where he can train. Despite being a fast-talking wise guy from the streets of Brooklyn, he quickly gains the affection of the younger boys in the area. At 20 years old, he is on the cusp of achieving his dream of fighting in a professional setting. On October 1st of 1921, he is scheduled to fight welterweight Jimmy Ford in a professional 6-round match. In Chicago, similar to New York, Irish and Jewish boxers dominate the sport, while Italian fighters, though present, don't enjoy the same success. This leads to many Italians changing their names to sound more Irish. Thus, Vincent chooses to adopt the professional name, Jack McGURN. In attendance on the October 1st boxing bout is bootlegger Johnny Torrio with his young lieutenant, Alphonse Capone. Capone, much like his boss, is on the lookout for young fighters to manage. He has a strong passion for boxing, having himself been a formidable fighter not so long ago. Additionally, he needs muscle for their expanding organization, especially now that Big Jim Colosimo is out of the picture. He would regularly go around scouting gymnasiums and fight clubs for promising prospects. After McGURN's victory on October 1st, he is scheduled for another bout on November 4th, which he also wins. His third bout against Vic Hirsch ends in a draw. So does his fourth bout with Eddie Mahoney. Nevertheless, on June 24, 1922, McGURN experiences his inaugural defeat at the hands of Bud Cristiano. Despite this setback, his professionalism catches the attention of Capone. During this time, Capone and McGURN develop a friendship, as they seem to have a good understanding from the start. As it becomes apparent that McGURN's boxing career is not flourishing, he realizes the need to explore other avenues for sources of income. At the age of 20, Jack McGURN, now part of the Torrio Capone organization, starts making good money and even purchases an automobile. His stepfather, Angelo, is also prospering, having opened a small grocery business at 700 East Vernon Park Place, within walking distance of his home. However, it's also an area controlled by the terrible Jenner brothers. While primarily focused on his grocery business, Angelo dabbles in the bootlegging trade as well, distributing for Joseph Montana, a so-called importer, with a store at South Morgan Street and Blue Island Avenue. Since Montana has ties to the Jenners, Angelo effectively becomes a distributor for them as well. The lucrative nature of bootlegging prompts Angelo to expand and take on other customers. Soon word of Angelo's extended success leaks out to the Jenners, who believe they should rule Little Italy alone. On January 8, 1923, Angelo is shot to death on his way to work by two men from the Orazio Tropea crew. Tropea's crew are dangerous men who often supplement their incomes by extorting the residents of Little Italy. They were reportedly sent to kill Angelo on the orders of the Jenner brothers. The police officers who see McGURN's innocent face on the street that morning have no idea that he has just recently become the muscle for the Torrio Capone outfit. On May 21, 1923, McGURN has his last boxing match and will never fight inside a ring again. By 1924, Jack McGURN has become close to Al Capone and his brothers, earning their complete trust through his fearlessness, loyalty, and likable personality. Despite his unassuming appearance, he proves himself to be a tough individual on the streets. Although McGURN is not involved in the most famous killing of 1924, it sets a course for his future and for everyone around him. The killing of Dino Bagnon in his flower shop by a mixture of Jenner and Torrio Capone gunmen initiates the gang revenge wars. It is the genesis of a violent conflict that will continue for 5 years, culminating in an act that will shock the entire world. The murder of O'Banion sets things in motion that will eventually transform McGURN into Al Capone's commanding general. Dino Bagnon's actions, among others, caused a political stir for the Torrio outfit by pledging his North Side support to Republican Robert Crowe for Cook County State's attorney in the upcoming November election. This move clashed with Torrio's needs, as he required Democrat Michael Ego in the state's attorney's position for his outfit's operations. The gang's futures relied heavily on their political ties, including relationships with mayors, state's attorneys, judges, and law enforcement officials. On November 4th, McGURN and the rest of the muscle were fully mobilized to influence the election outcome, using tactics that ranged from intimidation to violence. Election day turned into a roving battle, with rival gangsters shooting at each other. To Capone's anger, Dino Bagnon and his Northsiders ruled the day. Capone decided he needed help and elicits the conspiratorial aid of his allies, the Jenner brothers, who are O'Banion's worst enemies. The Jenners offer the services of their thoroughbred killers, imported Sicilians John Scalesi and Albert Anselmi. Even Mike Jenner, who hates O'Banion more than Capone does, volunteers to be the driver. Mike Merlo, head of the Unione Siciliana labor organization, had a vested interest in keeping the peace between Chicago's gangs, and he convinced Torrio to forestall any violence against the North Side gang. However, when Merlo passed away, Capone and the Jenner brothers decided to kill Dino Bagnon immediately. On November 10, 1924, 3 men, including Brooklyn gangster Frankie Yale, entered O'Banion's flower shop, then shot and killed him. Dino Bagnon's Northside gang is devastated by his death. Their immediate response is to seek revenge against Torrio and the Jenner brothers. However, Al Capone is surprised and angered when, soon after Mike Merlo's funeral, Angelo Jenner takes over the presidency of the Unione Siciliana. The Jenners' swift power grab leads to another round of internal gang conflict. This situation demands strong leadership, and Capone realizes he already has this quality in Jack McGURN. On January 24, 1925, Jaime Weiss and George Moran attempt to assassinate the moderate Johnny Torrio. After recovering, Torrio handed control of the gang to Capone and fled to New York. The Northsiders, who thought they knew their adversary in Johnny Torrio, are now faced with a whole new level of threat, Al Capone and Jack McGURN. Conflicts between the Jenner brothers and the Northsiders escalated after the murder of Dino Bagnon. Capone also targeted the Jenners, aiming to regain control of the Unione Siciliana. Since McGURN's stepfather's death in 1923, he has been patiently waiting for the opportunity, and now, with Capone behind him, McGURN is in line to pull the trigger as soon as he can. It remains unclear who is responsible for the deaths of Angelo and Tony Jenner, with speculation suggesting the involvement of both the Northsiders, Capone, and potentially McGURN. Fortunately for Capone, the Northsiders initiated their assault against the Jenners on May 25, 1925. The following day, Angelo Jenner is ambushed and killed after a car chase. In a surprising turn, it is the Chicago police who shoot and kill Mike Jenner. On June 13, 1925, Mike Jenner, Albert Anselmi, and John Scalise had a shootout with the Northsiders. After the shootout, the three men were chased by Chicago police detectives, during which two of the policemen were killed, including Mike Jenner. Albert Anselmi and John Scalise, also known as the Murder Twins, are arrested and later represented by Capone's lawyer at Capone's request. They are acquitted after 2 years, claiming self-defense. However, during the period of 1925 to 1927, when they were out on bond, they went to work for Capone as subordinates to Jack McGURN. On July 8th, Anthony Jenner is lured out of his penthouse by someone he knows and is shot 5 times in the back by 2 gunmen. On October 30th, Jack McGURN makes his debut in the criminal courts after he is arrested for carrying a concealed .32 caliber revolver. Since this is his first offense, he is found guilty and sentenced to 1 year's probation. In a twist of fate that favored McGURN, the Northsiders' actions against the Jenner brothers led to Capone ordering the executions of the Jenners' most effective hit squad, the Orazio Tropea crew. In 1926, McGURN tracked down his stepfather's suspected killers. Orazio Tropea meets his end on February 15th with 2 shotgun blasts. 10 days later, Vito Basconi is gunned down. His body is discovered the following day with multiple bullet wounds to the head. Another 3 days later, Edward Baldelli, Tropea's driver, is found in a Chicago alley, brutally beaten and shot twice in the head. On March 2nd, 1926, McGURN narrowly escapes an assassination attempt, marking his first mention in a newspaper as a gangster. As the conflict between the South Side and North Side gangs intensifies, McGURN becomes a target for Capone's enemies, leading to his growing notoriety in Chicago's underworld. With each killing, he gains new adversaries and faces the possibility of revenge from the victims' relatives, becoming deeply entrenched in the cycle of gangland violence. Louis Big Smith, a notorious figure from New York, arrived in Chicago and became a bodyguard, possibly for one of the Northsiders. He later formed his own gang and began hijacking anybody and everybody's alcohol shipments. Smith, however, made the fatal error of crossing the outfit. On August 10, 1926, McGURN shot and killed Smith, making it the 42nd gang-related murder in Chicago that year. Despite facing legal troubles, including an arrest for conspiracy to commit voter fraud on July 22nd and a concealed weapon violation on August 20th, McGURN managed to evade serious consequences with the help of Capone's attorneys. However, a pivotal moment occurs when Jaime Weiss's actions prompt a change in Capone's assassination strategies. Weiss, known for his volatile behavior, takes an offensive stance, leading to a historic event in Chicago involving a machine gun. This event catapults McGURN into a new phase of his criminal career, further escalating the violence in Chicago. One of the most audacious attempts to kill Al Capone occurs on September 20th, 1926, at the Hawthorne Inn restaurant. A convoy of several cars slowly passes by the Hawthorne Inn, with each car stopping in front of the hotel as Northside gunmen, armed with submachine guns, systematically shoot at the windows of the restaurant and nearby storefronts. From the last vehicle emerges a lone machine gunner, believed to be George Moran, who walks up to the inn's doorway, kneels down, and fires a massive 100-round drum into the lobby and restaurant. Despite the attack, Capone survives. McGURN seizes this chance for advancement, and Capone, impressed by McGURN's abilities, makes strategic changes. By the end of September, McGURN, without a doubt, has been chosen to lead Alphonse Capone's gangsters. Under McGURN's leadership, the gang operations become noticeably more organized and effective. This is particularly evident in the assassination of Jaime Weiss, which is meticulously planned and executed. To eliminate Weiss, McGURN employs a strategy involving careful reconnaissance and stealthy infiltration into the North Side's territory north of Madison Street. McGURN rents 2 rooms to serve as observation posts, which are essentially machine gun nests disguised by seemingly innocent occupants. On October 11, 1926, as the Capone shooters patiently wait and observe, Weiss emerges at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just before rush hour, accompanied by his driver, bodyguard, a 20th Ward politician, and a private investigator. From the State Street apartment, McGURN and another shooter open fire on Weiss and his group using a submachine gun and a shotgun. Despite the presence of a few bystanders, the shooters demonstrate exceptional marksmanship, focusing their fire on Weiss and his companions. Weiss is hit by 10 bullets, killing him instantly, while his bodyguard is struck by 15 rounds and dies a short distance away. The remaining men sustain injuries but survive the attack. McGURN's exceptional accuracy with the Thompson submachine gun becomes a notable aspect of his criminal activities. Despite his preference for using a .32 or .38 caliber revolver, his skill with the submachine gun remains consistent and impressive. While the Weiss murder marks only the 6th instance of using the automatic weapon, its fearsome reputation begins to solidify. The Weiss murder also marks a turning point in the beer wars of 1926. Efforts are made to establish peace among the Chicago gangs, culminating in a treaty forged during a meeting at the Sherman Hotel on October 21st, attended by 30 gang leaders. In a notably ill-advised move, Joey Aiello offers a $50,000 reward for anyone who kills Capone, unaware that Capone has McGURN, who is always one step ahead. There is a new need for reliable manpower in the face of such a threat, and the 42 gang provides an excellent candidate, Antonino Accardo, sponsored by Jack McGURN. In 1927, McGURN and his men eliminate at least 3 assassins who have come to Chicago to eliminate Al Capone. The first would-be assassin to die is the imported killer Anthony Torchio from New York. He is shot to death just hours after arriving in Chicago to kill Capone and collect his $50,000. Torchio's body is discovered by police on May 25th, with Chicago police suspecting McGURN, aided by murder twin John Scalise. On June 6, less than 2 weeks after Torchio's body is found, 2 police officers recognize McGURN on the street. They frisk him and find a loaded .32 Smith & Wesson revolver. Leading to his arrest, however, he walks free again. On August 2, 1927, McGURN is arrested and arraigned as a suspect in kidnapping and murder. During the short trial, witnesses either recant or disappear, leading the judge to file a nolle prosequi. The last contract killer to attempt Joey Aiello's bounty on Al Capone is Sam Valente from Cleveland. He is shot down in September 1927. In October, McGURN is frisked, found armed, and arrested on his 4th concealed weapons charge. After being convicted on October 7th, McGURN keeps a low profile for a month, playing golf. In early 1928, McGURN is suspected in the killing of 25-year-old Frank Dutch Carpenter, a cohort of gangster Danny Stanton. Carpenter was reportedly lured to the Radio Inn for a New Year's date, where he was robbed and shot. On March 7th, McGURN is in the near North Side territory, delivering Capone pinball and slot machines to various businesses. He is spotted by a member of the North Side gang. Minutes later, a sedan pulls up outside, discharging 3 men, one with a submachine gun who begins firing into the doorway. McGURN is hit by 2 bullets in the right lung and right shoulder. It has long been the suspicion that the gunmen were Moran's henchmen, Frank and Pete Gusenberg, and this being their second attempt to kill McGURN. In a new legal strategy against gangsters with no legal source of income, police charge McGURN with vagrancy and disorderly conduct, despite him being a victim. The United Press spreads the news. Gangland breaks loose again. McGURN is shot. The country is informed that he is gravely wounded near the heart and that he will die. They identify him as the chief lieutenant of Capone's forces. The resilient McGURN is out of the hospital and out of jail 2 weeks later, after Capone's lawyers furnish his bond money. He spends the next 3 months recuperating and staying out of the limelight as well as the line of fire. On April 17th, 1928, McGURN narrowly escapes another unsuccessful attempt on his life by the North Siders. On May 14th, police raid his apartment and find a loaded Thompson submachine gun. McGURN claims the weapons are for protection, stating that he is no longer involved with his old gangster associates since his recent serious injury. When McGURN is arrested for vagrancy and disorderly conduct, the deputy police commissioner tells him, "Get out of town." McGURN is immediately bailed out. However, he doesn't leave town because he must return to court to answer the charges on May 31st, but these charges are dropped as before. On November 14th, McGURN allegedly shoots William Billy Davin, one of the men responsible for the March shooting, who dies on December 30th, 1928. A week after McGURN shoots Davin, the Moran gang violently takes over the Cleaners and Dyers Union. In December 1928, while Capone and McGURN are in Florida, George Moran makes a power play by installing his man Albert Weinshank as president of the Cleaners and Dyers Union a few days after the New Year. Almost simultaneously, Joey Aiello, who'd been hiding out of town after his failed attempt to kill Al Capone in 1927, returns to Chicago to regain control of the Union Siciliana. This leads to members of the North Siders, including Pete Gusenberg, gunning down the Unione president. In response, from Miami, Capone ensures that 26-year-old Joseph Guinter is installed as president of the Unione Siciliana. Following the St. Valentine's Day massacre of 1929, McGURN remains under intense law enforcement scrutiny for the rest of his life. The massacre sets a new standard for urban violence, causing collateral damage that McGURN had always managed to avoid. Whether McGURN planned or was actually involved in the massacre remains debatable, but what remains clear is that men dressed as policemen in the employment of Al Capone executed 7 men associated with George Moran's North Side gang. Shortly after 10 a.m. on the morning of February 14, 1929, various Moran gang members walk in the front door of the SMC Carthage. One of the men is mistakenly identified as George Moran. 2 men in stolen Chicago police uniforms, another dressed like a civilian, and 2 phony detectives in long coats pull up at the SMC Carthage. 4 of the men enter the building and line up the 7 men in the garage against the side brick wall. 2 of the men lined up are Frank and Pete Gusenberg, the would-be Jack McGURN assassins. Another man among them is Albert Weinshank, the implanted Cleaners Union president. However, missing from the lineup is the boss, George Moran. Regardless of Moran's absence, within minutes all 7 men are shot multiple times and killed. Years later, FBI agent William Roemer will spend years listening to wiretap conversations within the mob. The agent will assert that he heard Tony Accardo fondly recall his involvement as one of the killers, alongside Jack McGURN, at the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Investigators quickly link the massacre to Capone's labor racketeering, particularly involving the Chicago Cleaners and Dyers Union. This event marks the beginning of the end for George Moran's North Side gang, which soon dwindles, leaving the outfit as the dominant criminal force in Chicago. On February 27th, McGURN is arrested and identified by witnesses in a police lineup. However, these witnesses later recant their testimonies, and McGURN's girlfriend Louise Rolfe provides an alibi claiming he was with her at the time of the massacre. This alibi earns her the moniker the Blonde Alibi in the newspapers. Despite the initial charges against McGURN and the surrender of Rocco Finelli, the state's attorney's investigation team eventually concludes that while McGURN may have been present and/or directed the massacre, he was not one of the actual killers. However, on March 11th, New York police detectives implicate McGURN in the 1928 killing of Frankie Yale, a former bootlegging partner of Capone's who had fallen out of favor and was subsequently executed. On May 7th, Capone kills Albert Anselmi, John Scalise, and Joseph Guinter, and a few days later he attends a Gangster Summit conference at the President Hotel in Atlantic City. Many notable gang leaders are there from Chicago and the East Coast, including infamous New York Prime Minister of the Underworld Frank Costello and future head of the governing body of the American Mafia, Charles "Lucky" Luciano. At the conference, there is widespread discontent with Capone, particularly regarding the St. Valentine's Day massacre and the escalating violence in Chicago. Capone's reputation takes a hit, and there is a sense of dissatisfaction with the state of affairs in his territory. On May 17th, Capone and Frankie Rio are arrested in Philadelphia for carrying concealed weapons after they are seen disembarking from the Chicago-bound Broadway Limited train. Initially facing a 90-day sentence, the judge extends their stay to a year. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Frank Nitti takes over as the temporary head of the outfit, showing little regard for Capone's right-hand man, Jack McGURN. After forfeiting bond in Chicago Municipal Court, McGURN and his stepbrother Anthony travel to Florida with Louise. However, on March 20, 1930, authorities raid Capone's Palm Island estate and arrest McGURN, along with Capone's brother John. Capone's legal team manages to secure McGURN's release, allowing him to continue his vacation. Shortly after, on April 1st, McGURN, Louise, and Anthony are arrested on a Miami Beach golf course. While Louise is released, McGURN and Anthony remain in the Dade County lockup until April 10th, when they are transported back to Chicago. Following these events, on April 24th, Frank Loesch, the president of the Chicago Crime Commission, publishes a list of the city's 28 most prominent gangsters, designating them as public enemies, with Jack McGURN ranking 5th on the list. On June 23, 1930, McGURN goes to trial and is convicted on June 25th of carrying a concealed weapon. However, the judge allows McGURN his liberty on a $10,000 bond. On October 23rd, Joey Aiello is shot and dies on a walkway with more than 30 bullet holes in his body. The neighborhood residents see gunmen running from an apartment, but no identification or arrests are ever made. After Aiello's signature murder, vagrancy warrants are issued, including one for McGURN. However, he fails to appear, unwilling to admit he is a vagrant. On October 17, 1931, Capone was convicted on 5 counts of income tax evasion and was sentenced a week later to 11 years in federal prison. When Capone takes the train to prison, Frank Nitti, Paul Ricker, Murray Humphreys, and Jake Guzik focus their eyes on gambling and union racketeering. Enforcing their attempt to dominate various national unions, McGURN leads his group of tough guys, which include Tony Accardo and another McGURN protege, Sam Giancana. Unlike Al Capone, Nitti makes a near-fatal mistake not choosing Jack McGURN as a bodyguard. When December 19th, Nitti is shot by a police officer during a raid, although he does survive. In 1933, Jack McGURN makes a deliberate choice to distance himself from the criminal underworld, intent on pursuing a career as a professional golfer. He participates in the first qualifying round of the Western Open Golf Tournament at Olympia Fields Country Club in August 1933. Fully committed to leaving his violent past behind, he embraces his name, Vincent Gibardi. However, on August 26, McGURN is arrested for vagrancy while playing golf, as police notice his name, Vincent Gibardi, on the tournament entrant list. After spending a weekend in jail, McGURN appears before a judge on August 30th and is found guilty, receiving a maximum penalty of 6 months in jail. Despite this, he is released on a cash appeal bond of $10,000 and never serves time for vagrancy again. By 1935, McGURN's life appears to be unraveling as he finds himself at odds with Frank Nitti. On February 15, 1936, exactly 7 years and 1 day after the St. Valentine's Day massacre, Machine Gun Jack McGURN is shot in the back of the head with 245 caliber bullets while bowling in Chicago.